We all know about the brands that nailed the luxury car, and many of them have survived for decades and sell in large numbers today. This story is about the would-be luxury brands that didn't fare so well. 1. Delahaye, 1894 to 1955. Delahaye was a family-owned business founded in Tours, France, and focused on horse-drawn carriages before shifting to luxury car making. After the Second World War, money was in short supply and luxury French market struggled, and what was once Delahaye's strong suit quickly became its weakness as luxury cars were at the bottom of people's priorities. Finances dwindled and the firm closed in 1955. 2. Napier, 1895 to 1924. Napier had been going since 1808, producing steam-powered printing press machines, and when Napier's son took over in 1847, the focus was soon on coin-making machines. In 1895, the firm began tinkering with car components, which led to building race cars. After the First World War, Napier produced cars with Cunard coachwork that cost just as much as a Rolls-Royce, but they were outperformed by cars that featured more powerful engines. In 1924, Napier's finance charts began to look poor. It soon quit car production to focus on aircraft engines, something that was guaranteed to bring in cash. Today, the remnants of the company are part of the U.S. company Wabtec. 3. Packard, 1899 to 1958. High-end carmaker Packard beat the Depression era of the 1930s by making more cars at affordable price points, which meant it could remain relevant not just in the luxury but also in mid-level cars. While other marques died off, Packard nailed it. After the Second World War, Packard found competing with luxury brands from General Motors especially difficult, and this led the company to merge with Studebaker in 1954. The company started making rebadged mainstream Studebakers, and the brand image suffered. The last Packard was built in 1958. 4. Isotta Fraschini, 1900-1949/1999. Popular with film stars, Italy's Isotta Fraschini made limousines in the 1920s, but it later became a star itself when a 1929 Tipo 8A Castagna transformable was featured in a 1934 blockbusting film. However, the 1930s economic crisis and then the Second World War hit the firm hard, and it stopped making cars in 1949. The company continued, and in 1955 it merged with an engine manufacturer to make trolley buses. In 1996, a posh convertible concept car arrived. Despite various conjuring attempts, the luxury marque closed in 1999 for good. 5. Lozier Motor Co., 1900 to 1915. Lozier automobiles were built in Detroit and were luxury cars costing as much as $7,750 back in 1910, the equivalent of $250,000 today. Lozier's top designer Frederick Chandler left the company in 1913 and started his own Chandler Motor Company and took various Lozier executives with him. In 1914, Lozier attempted a mid-level four-cylinder car, but it flopped. This, combined with the brain drain of top staff, forced it into bankruptcy just 15 years after being founded. 6. Peerless Motor Company, 1900 to 1931. Peerless popularized what would eventually be standard technologies such as drum brakes. It built luxury cars that competed with GM's Cadillac. Peerless even built a V8 to compete with Cadillacs. It then moved to construct military vehicles in the First World War. However, its very expensive cars, including ones powered by V16 engines, fared badly in the Great Depression, and production ended in 1931. The company started brewing beer instead. 7. Auburn, 1900 to 1937. After making various cars over its early years, Arid Lobencord took it over in 1924 and in 1928 produced the Auburn Speedster, a handsome high-end roadster. There were various Speedster iterations, but they were quite impractical, and in any case the Great Depression impacted sales. Not helped by some of Mr. Cord's dubious business practices, the company closed in 1937. 8. Pierce Arrow, 1901 to 1938. Trucks, fire engines, camp trailers, boats, motorcycles, and bicycles, you name it, Pierce Arrow made it. Although it had been going since 1865, it only started producing cars in 1901, and in 1904, it entered the luxury car market with the Great Arrow. President William Howard Taft ordered 2 Model M Tourers in 1909 to be used as official White House cars. Pierce Arrow quickly became a Hollywood favorite, but it was the only marque that never offered a lower-priced car to provide steady cash flow. A merger with Studebaker meant a strong future for Pierce Arrow. However, the economic recession scales tipped against it, and Packard overtook it with its competitively priced 120. After just 37 years, Pierce Arrow closed its doors. 9. Horch, 1904. Although it helped give birth to one of the world's most famous luxury brands in Audi, Horch itself only lasted until 1932 before it merged with other brands to form Auto Union. Luxury cars with 8-cylinder engines were Auto Union's forte, but the Second World War arrived, and it became an arms maker. Its plants were heavily bombed and were eventually occupied by the Soviets. To salvage what was left, Auto Union executives packed up for West Germany, and Auto Union GmbH was formed. The luxury-focused brands, Audi and Horch, were forced to sleep into dormancy, with the latter remaining there. Audi was relaunched in 1965, while the Horch name was used in 2022 for a top-of-the-range Audi A8L sold only in China. 10. Delage, 1905 to 1954. France's Delage started in 1905 and later merged with Hotchkiss, another ill-fated brand. Delage's engines were works of art, while cars like the stunning D8 120 Coupe carried the brand's luxury image with pride. With both a drastic increase in motoring tax in France and an economic crisis, Delage hit a wall in 1935. Louis Delage was soon forced to declare bankruptcy, which soon saw him dying in poverty in 1947. Delage was absorbed into Hotchkiss, and production ended in 1954. It recently relaunched with the D12, a sports car. 11. Franklin Automobile Co., 1906 to 1934. From metal die-casting to building full-size luxury cars, the American Herbert H. Franklin founded Franklin Automobile Co., which focused on air-cooled cars. As things began looking up, Franklin introduced new engines, one of which included a 150 brake horsepower 12-cylinder to match increasing competition from other marques. Franklin advertised it as a supercharged engine, but this was just a duct from a cooling fan, which meant it was more of a ram-air affair. A great idea rapidly turned into a costly mistake, as the car couldn't outhandle its peers, which led to low sales. Combining an expensive V12 with the Great Depression led to bankruptcy in 1934. 12. Stutz, 1911. Stutz was backed by mechanical mastermind Harry Stutz, a man who developed his first car on his family's farm while young. This eventually led to the Stutz Bearcat, a sports car which sold over 3,000 units in its first 4 years, with other luxury machines to follow. The Great Depression hit, and sales dwindled. Next was a lawsuit which was filed over a breach of contract regarding engine building. Just 6 cars were produced from 1934, and soon, Stutz was added to the list of marques that fell victim to the Great Depression. 13. DuPont, 1919 to 1932. It was rare that an American brand could come close to Cadillac or Packard. These two were kings of luxury motoring, and many marques had attempted to compete, with only a few succeeding, one of which was DuPont. The DuPont family had made its fortune in chemicals, and this allowed a higher expenditure and for top staff to be hired. As a result, both style and quality were strong between 1919 and 1931. However, the Great Depression hit, and even the DuPont's wealth couldn't save the car marque. It closed in 1932. 14. Samson, 1919 to 1957. Like other manufacturers on our list, France's Samson produced other things before cars. It made centrifugal pumps. Samson wanted to broaden its horizons, therefore it started building cycle cars for British firm GN. Later, Samson's car division became a separate entity known as the Société de Moteurs Samson, and its first cars soon arrived. Through the early to mid-20s, it built 6 different models before moving on to its new S-Series model range, and while its cars grew slowly in popularity, Samsung faced France's harsh tax policy which targeted cars with larger engines. It made its large car in 1957. 15. Duesenberg, 1920 to 1937. Duesenberg was founded by 2 brothers who first built engines and race cars and then luxury passenger cars. In 1926, the brothers partnered with Arid Lobancourt, who would help push the brand to the top of the luxury car market alongside Auburn. After just 6 years, one of the brothers died while the other attempted to soldier on with Cord. Duesenberg was unable to prosper during the Great Depression, and this maker of some of the world's most beautiful cars closed its doors for good in 1937. 16. LaSalle, 1927 to 1940. The LaSalle brand was designed by General Motors to slot in just below Cadillac in the company lineup. After releasing its first car, LaSalle's direct competitor, Packard, hit back with the lower-priced 110 and 120. Still, LaSalle cars were popular, but the Great Depression hit, and production was slashed. LaSalle struggled to claw back the sales when up against Packard, which was dominating the affordable luxury market, and, in the end, GM executives pulled the plug. 17. Cord, 1929 to 1937. Despite being an innovative company, Cord's reliability was weak, its futuristic gearboxes seized, wheel bearings failed, and despite its large front grills, engine cooling was poor. Complaints rolled in, and this slowly caused the dealer base to shrink. The company made its demise in 1937 after just 8 years of production. 18. Borgward, 1933 to 1963. While not a full-blooded luxury brand exactly, Borgward did make the Isabella, a luxury car that sold quite well in the 1950s. However, Borgward expanded the model into new variants such as a cabriolet, which needed added rigidity and thus production cost and sales price. Challenged by problems of its sister company Lloyd, the firm closed down in 1963, with founder Carl Borgward dying the same year. 19. Talbot Lego, 1936 to 1959. Italian engineer Antonio Lego bought the rights to the Talbot brand name after its first demise in 1936 under the STD Motors name. In 1947, a new car known as the Grand Sport T26 arrived, but rumors were already circulating that the marque was struggling financially. To draw in more customers, a 4-cylinder car soon appeared in the 1950s known as the T14 LS, which had stylish bodywork but a pre-war chassis and a poor engine. These were difficult to sell as a result. With sales dwindling, Lego was forced to seek court protection from his creditors. Lego was able to restart production, but finances were severely damaged, and eventually, Talbot Lego was sold to Simca. 20. ISO, 1938 to 1974. Motorcycles, bubble cars, and the IR300, the latter being a high-end GT car that would target Maserati, Ferrari, and Aston Martin. The IR300's bodywork was fine art that had been penciled by Breton and would be powered by a 300 brake horsepower Chevrolet Corvette V8 engine. Shortly after its next car was introduced, the Griffo, GM demanded advanced payment for the engines, something that ISO couldn't yet afford to do. This, combined with fierce competition and the 1973 oil crisis, put ISO in financial difficulty, and ISO closed down in 1974. 21. Faisal Vega, 1939 to 1964. The Faisal Vega company made pressed steel components and car bodies for Simca, Panhard, and Delahaye before launching its own cars. Its first car, the FV, arrived in 1954, and it was both quick and stylish. Faisal Vega used Chrysler power plants, but later switched due to the lack of 4-cylinder engines on offer. Next up was the 1960 Facelia, a smaller car which used a 1.6-liter designed by a former Talbot Lego engineer. However, the engine had to be compliant with the strict French horsepower tax system, and this meant some internals needed to be redesigned. Things weren't quite right, and engines began failing. Volvo B18 power plants were later brought in as a snappy replacement, but the damage was done. Phones were ringing off hooks in after-sales, and it seems the company lost money on every car it ever made. Eventually, it shut its doors in 1964. For a country that is famed for its luxury brands Louis Vuitton, Hermès, Chanel, etc., it remains a mystery why France has never produced an enduring luxury car brand. 22. Imperial, 1955 to 1975, 1981 to 1983. The Imperial name was first used on a luxury Chrysler model in 1926, but in 1955 it became a brand in its own right, focusing on GM's Cadillac and Ford's Lincoln. Quality control slipped when second-generation cars were introduced due to them being built too quickly and components began to fail. Later, in the 1970s, the brand was too small to fund its own platform for luxury cars, so had to make do with one from the Chrysler New Yorker. This affected Imperial's image, and the price of fuel didn't help either. The brand was closed in 1975, though was briefly revived between 1981 and 1983. 23. Edsel, 1956 to 1959. Was Edsel a luxury brand? Well, maybe. It was certainly Ford's idea of luxury on a budget. It slotted between Lincoln and Mercury and would directly compete with GM's Buick and Pontiac. Edsels were packed with innovative tech and futuristic design cues, but despite this, the public just couldn't get on board. Everything about Edsel was odd, including the car's designs and the fact that Ford management appeared to lose interest in it before it had even launched. Build quality was poor, and then the Eisenhower recession of 1958 saw car sales plunge. After 3 years and just 118,287 cars, Ford called it a day. 24. Zimmer, 1980. The Zimmer receipt was to take a 1980s Ford Mustang and dress it in a 1930s outfit. This was something of a niche and sales were small. The company went bankrupt in 1988. It was later acquired in 1996 and built 10 to 20 cars per year up until it became defunct in 2020. As with many strange cars, there's still a small cult following for Zimmers. 25. Mercer, 1985 to 1990. By 1983, it was increasingly clear that younger image-focused car buyers in America were lapping up snappy German sports compacts like the BMW 3 Series and Mercedes 190e. Ford's response, championed by executive Bob Lutz, was to take German-produced Fords and dress them up for the American market with a new brand, Mercer. First in the lineup was the Mercer XR4T, which was a Ford Sierra XR4i underneath, although the original 2.8-liter V6 was swapped out for a 2.34-cylinder due to American regulations. Next was the Scorpio, which was produced in West Germany and remains one of the shortest-lived Fords, surviving for just 2 model years. Worse, the strength of the German currency made the cars expensive in America, while new U.S. safety regulations forced expensive changes. Ford scuttled Mercer in 1990. 26. Amati, 1991 to 1992. Toyota had Lexus, Nissan had Infiniti, and Honda had Acura, so Mazda came up with Amati as its luxury brand. However, it was rather late to the party, and by the time it came to launch, the Japanese stock market bubble had burst and the company was desperate to save money. Announced in 1991, it got canceled just a year later before launch. Its first model was supposed to be the Amati 500. This was launched in Europe as the Mazda Zetos 6 in 1992. The first U.S. Amati was eventually launched as the Mazda Millennia in America in 1995. 27. Infiniti, 1989. It's still going today, but Nissan's luxury division had a troubled time in Europe. In 1989, Infiniti began selling cars in North America, and by 2010 it had dealers in over 50 countries. It launched in Europe in 2009, but this was during a deep recession. It also initially lacked diesel engines at a time when Europe was in love with them. Infiniti's designs seemed to work much better in the US and Asia, and of course the brand was totally unknown, which made it tough to compete with established brands like Audi and BMW. Ultimately, Nissan killed the brand off in Europe in 2020. 28. Infini, 1991 to 1997. Amati may be delightfully obscure, but few people outside Japan know about Infini, sometimes styled as Ifini, which was Mazda's luxury brand sold in Japan only. Its cars included the MS6, based on the hatchback known as the Mazda 626 in most markets, and the MS8, a large saloon. Mazda jumped all its other brands like Infini, Autasm, and Unos to focus on the Mazda badge itself in 1997. 29. Alpheon, 2010 to 2015. If you squint your eyes a bit, you can see a bit of Vauxhall/Opel Insignia, or for those in the US, a Buick LaCrosse. That's because Alpheon was GM's attempt at a luxury brand for Korea. It was a strange moment as GM had just narrowly avoided total collapse, and had got rid of a bunch of brands like Pontiac in the process. But Buick didn't exist in Korea, and instead of inventing it or launching under its mainstream Daewoo brand, GM came up with Alpheon. After modest success, GM seemed to lose interest in Alpheon, and it was dropped in 2015, having launched just one model.